Hey, what's up, guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. This is the review and commentary on the second night of Childhood's End, the Deceivers. And this one was way more intense and deliberate in terms of its spiritual propaganda and messaging. And so I'm going to go through some of the major plot points and the events that occurred. You can definitely go and watch the whole thing on Syfy channel. I have a link in the description section to their website where you can actually watch the full episode. Just got to sit through a couple commercials and stuff. But in any case, this whole episode had to do with faith, and in particular, Christianity, but I think in general, the destruction of faith. The scene begins in 2035. It's 4 years after Karellen appears to the people. The world has pretty much achieved world peace, and it's led by this thing called the World Federation. And the song that's playing in the background of the episode, the intro of the episode, is a cover version of the song Imagine by John Lennon. Now, if you know anything about the occult and the history of Lennon, the song Imagine is quite literally the utopian dream and the anthem for the New World Order, which I found interesting. Now, there was an emphasis on a specific line, which was, "and no religion too." And here are the lyrics leading up to it. Imagine there's no heaven, it's easy if you try, no hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries, it isn't hard to do, nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Now, the story follows Milo, who we met in the last episode, who still questions the integrity of the Overlords and their plan, and he points out that they know nothing about these alleged aliens, and as the scientific community becomes stalled and eventually phased out of this new alleged utopia, Milo gets phased out of his job as an astrophysicist. Now, in the meantime, Karellen gifts one of the leaders of the World Federation, Dr. Rupert Boyce, a room configured with an extraterrestrial Ouija board, and when you look at it from above, it resembles an all-seeing eye. Now, of course, this probably being an homage to the all-seeing eye of Horus. No surprises there, and there's references to it later in the episode. Now, if you recall, at the end of the first episode, they showed a family watching the revealing of Karellen, and it ended with the smile of a young little boy. Well, this was the Gregson family, and they play a pretty important role in this episode. In fact, in one blasphemous scene, a pod from the Overlords makes a visit to the Gregson home in the middle of the night. And the light beams that, do all the stuff for the pods and the Overlords enters the home and possesses the little boy Tommy, and at the same time impregnates the mother Amy. Now, this all plays into the narrative that's been peddled by ancient alien theorists, right? That the virgin birth of Jesus was in fact some sort of extraterrestrial phenomenon. While Amy's not portrayed as a virgin because she obviously is married to her husband Jake and has a son Tommy, it does play into this blasphemous theme. When Jake tries to comfort his son after this whole thing, everyone's a little shaken up. Jake is thrown to the wall by his son telekinetically, and this leads to Jake and his wife Amy to bring in a counselor to find out what's going on with their son Tommy. Now, the counselor happens to be Peretta, the young girl we met in the first episode who believed in God, and also the one whose mother committed suicide after the Overlords showed up because she lost her faith. In a brief scene prior to her arrival at the Gregson home, it shows Peretta going through some religious documents, and it's not the Bible, it was just some religious documents here, and it mentions how the devil sends a false prophet, and she also had some clippings of newspapers and magazines that have the face of Ricky Stormgren, who we saw in the last episode also, indicating that he was the prophet, and of course, connecting it to this idea that Satan sends his false prophet in biblical prophecy. In Peretta's mind, this was all prophecy being unfolded. So when Peretta visits Tommy's family, the Gregsons, she tries to find out what's going on with him. Tommy proceeds to tell her that he travels to other locations and having visions and stuff. And in one particular moment, Peretta asks, "And what else do you see when you travel, Tom?" And Tommy answers, "An eye. Single giant eye. I see fire on the ground, smoke in the air. It blocks out the stars." Peretta responds, "You imagine this place?" Tommy says, "No, I go there. They take me there." And Peretta asks, "Who do you think takes you there?" "They do," as Tommy looks up. "The Overlords?" Now, throughout the scene, it shows Peretta's necklace, which is a little golden cross. And when she asks if it's the Overlords, they show her grab and rub the cross between her fingers. Now, in that moment, Tommy begins to hear the screams of a baby. It drives him crazy, and he screams and runs out of the room. Now, as Peretta chases after him and Tommy's parents try to comfort Tommy, the necklace with the cross on it begins to choke Peretta until the necklace breaks off of her neck. Now, as soon as it does, the chaos suddenly stops. Then Tommy in a very calm manner, mentions how the baby stopped crying, pointing at her mother Amy's belly. Amy's confused and says, "I'm not having a baby, Tom." Now, in terms of a biblical reference here, the place that this reminded me of was the bottomless pit, a place that has fire, smoke in the air where it blocks out the stars. You know, in Revelation 9 verses 1 and 2, here's what it says. "And the fifth angel blew his trumpet, and I saw a star fallen from heaven to earth, and he was given the key to the shaft of the bottomless pit. He opened the shaft of the bottomless pit, and from the shaft rose smoke like the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened with the smoke from the shaft." Then, of course, you have all the references to the day of the Lord that mentions how the stars no longer give its light and stuff like that. But in this story, the reference is supposed to be another planet, but from the perspective of the religious character Peretta, it's hell. Now, then there's Ricky. Of course, remember Ricky, he was the main guy. He's the prophet, so to speak. And it's interesting that another bad thing happens as soon as a biblical reference is made. His wife, Ellie, is outside of their little farmhouse trying to fend off the people that are trying to, annoy him and find out what's going on. And she yells at them saying, "What do you want from him? A Sermon on the Mount?" And of course, that's a reference to Jesus and the Sermon on the Mount. And as soon as she says that, Ricky falls and has a stroke. Later in desperation, it shows Ellie tried to communicate with Karellen, but no luck. And it should be noted here that early in the episode, Ricky meets with Karellen and he gets bad news. And basically it's that he is sterile. He cannot have children because Ricky was on the ship and it was some sort of mistake that was made by the Overlords. But that will come full circle in a little bit here. A scene with Milo and his friend and former co-worker Rachel ensues with a conversation about what's going on. Now, Milo theorizes that there was some psychic knowledge about the arrivals of the Overlords for centuries. He grabs a book. It's called Le Kabylion, La Philosophie Hermetica. And if you translate the whole cover there, it's a French book called The Kabylion, Study of the Hermetic Philosophy of Ancient Egypt and Ancient Greece. And of course, this is a stark contrast to what Peretta believes. And it shows her back at her church having a conversation with her pastor named Jim. She shows him an image of what appears to be hell in some biblical commentary book, and he states how the true colors of the Overlords is the devil. And she explains to him how she ran into a family, the Gregsons, and that she thinks the Overlords are attacking that family. But when she hands her pastor the necklace with the cross, totally bent out of shape, the pastor replies, "They're attacking more than that. Faith is on its last leg." Now, 4 months later, Amy is pregnant, and while the family plays outside, Tommy, the son, and Amy, the mother, both come to the conclusion that the baby's name should be Jennifer. Skeptical of any kind of supernatural intervention, Jake tells Amy that she must have mentioned the name to Tommy before, who mentioned the same name, Jennifer, for the new baby outside while they were playing. Amy responds, "No, Jake, it's divine intervention." Now, in contrast, again, Ellie and Ricky can't have children, which is very interesting. Then later, Peretta is seen praying outside of the home of the Gregsons, and at that moment, the Overlord's pod comes down and shines a light on her. And when Peretta holds the cross up to the light, the pod runs away, and she immediately runs to the Gregson home, kind of in hysteria, screaming about how they were here. Peretta explains to them how she's a spiritual person and that she believes that this is evil. Amy tries to comfort her by saying there's no such thing as evil, which is kind of interesting to say. And when she tried to tell them that Tommy is having visions about hell, Jake, the dad, gets mad and says, "I'm sorry, but my child does not take night trips to hell." And she is asked politely to leave. Now later, again, it shows Peretta praying to God, holding a necklace of the cross, and she sees on the television a news station talk about Ricky Stormgren, and the commentary was, why would the Overlord let their prophet suffer? Because, of course, he had that stroke and he was struggling. Well, she decides to go camp out and mission at the Stormgren farm. Back to Milo, he states, quote, "The golden dawn comes shining from the eyes of God." Again, Milo studying an occult textbook, this time called the Corpus Hermeticum, and of course, on his desk, an image of the all-seeing eye of Horus. Then his co-worker girlfriend invites him to this big party at the World Federation headquarters. A same invitation is given to the Gregson family because obviously Karellen is going to be there and it's going to be this big event. Now, before I move on here, interestingly enough, this story is trying to make it seem like the Hermetic history is the correct one and the biblical or religious understanding is the wrong one. And that is demonstrated by Milo, the smart astrophysicist, uncovering the occultism of planet Earth, and Peretta being hysterical about her faith, ending up on the wrong side of life, as we will see in a moment here. Now, in the meantime, again, Peretta befriends Ellie, the wife of Ricky on the farm, and as they're having a discussion, Peretta's mother comes up. She talks about how she was a missionary who lost her faith in God when the Overlords showed up and committed suicide. Peretta says, "When Karellen arrived, he killed the nature of God, and so she killed herself." Ellie's response, "I'm sorry, but I'm not sure God really helped any of us. He gave us diseases, and when we found cures for those, he created new ones. God was just this black void that we cried into, but only the overlords answered. But hey, if God wants to trump Karellen, bring it on. Isn't there something about barren women having children? If God's selling, then I'm buying. Now, this is because, of course, they were told that they cannot have children. Now, at this point, I'm going to skip a bunch of stuff that happens at the World Federation party and the whole supernatural Ouija board, which is actually just high technology and all that stuff. But it is intense, so I encourage you to watch it. Of course, Tommy, Jake, and Amy are there because of their invite from California all the way to Africa. And some interesting things happen where Karellen shows up. And I should mention that in that moment, Karellen talks about how they're going to take animals off the planet for their own home planet as sort of a zoo situation. And interestingly, later it shows the doctor, Rupert Boyce of the World Federation, where he asks the question of how Noah picked his 9 million species to place on the ark. Another biblical reference and another psychological schism where it makes you wonder, oh, maybe this whole Noah's flood thing and God was an alien. Maybe it was Karellen. It was the devil all along. Interesting. Now back to what's going on here with Peretta. Back at Ricky's farm, Karellen shows up to talk in person. He gives Ricky a serum that can basically resurrect life. Now during the conversation, Ellie shows up. Then Peretta barges in to confront them all. Karellen then admits that the reason why Ricky and Ellie cannot have children is because Karellen intervened. He states, quote, "I have stopped you from having children." Now again, giving him godlike powers almost, similar to the biblical God. And again, there's jab at God where earlier in the conversation, Ellie was open to buying what God was selling if God is able to heal a barren woman, right? And of course, they find out that actually the one controlling it is Karellen himself, making him out to be God. At that moment, Peretta grabs a shotgun and shoots Karellen. Karellen falls to the ground and he dies, presumably. He tells them that he was trying to spare Ricky and Ellie pain from having children because a change is coming. Now, Ricky, in his devotional fervor, grabs the serum that resurrects and jabs it into Karellen, and he is back up alive. Karellen then approaches Peretta and says, "Whether I'm alive or dead makes no difference to what is coming." Peretta responds, "You will never take away my faith." Karellen then says, "All of the world's religions cannot be right, Peretta. You know that. Your faith, beautiful with poetry, is beautiful, but there's no place for it now." Peretta, crying, says, "You deceived us." Karellen responds, "No, you have deceived yourselves." And at this point, Peretta leaves the farm. Her faith is ruined, and at the end, she commits suicide. Now, again, with this scene with Peretta and Karellen and the confrontation, there's a lot of stuff going on here. You have the resurrection of Karellen, the one who is not and is again because of what? Technology, serum. And who does it? The prophet, right? And this is interesting because this is a loose outline of what happens in Revelation 13, where the false prophet points to the first beast and even healing his wound, right? And this was a gunshot to the stomach, not to the head. But in any case, it's similar in nature. And again, I do think Arthur C. Clarke did take some of these ideas from the Bible to outline his story. But this notion of Peretta saying that her faith will never be taken, but then Karellen saying all the world's religions cannot be right. I mean, that makes no sense because, yeah, all the world's religions can't be right. There's only one properly correct truth. And so I don't know why that was the cause of Peretta's loss of faith, but it was in the story. And of course, in the end, what is seen wins over what is unseen, and faith is destroyed. And in the final scene, goes back to Amy having her baby, and the baby's eyes glow green, which is interesting because if you guys remember, some of you guys who have watched a bunch of my videos, there was a commercial for apartments.com where they showed young children whose eyes glow green. What's the messaging there? Interesting. And of course, green being the color of Satan in the occult. So in the end, again, this whole episode was about the end of faith, the powerlessness and absence of God, the mindless devotion of religious people of Christian faith especially, and the genius of the astrophysicist who uncovers the truths by looking at occult documents. All of it, again, propaganda, speaking to this idea that faith is weak, but in terms of supernaturalism, the reality of the spirit world is found in the occult, in the Hermetic order, right? And that's what is being portrayed here. 2 Corinthians 4:18, as we look not to the things that are seen, but to the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal. 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we live by faith, not by sight. And this whole story is about living by sight, not by faith. And then Hebrews 11:1, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. And again, this whole thing is about the attack on faith in general and this idea that we have blind faith about God. It, of course, completely omits all the rational, logical arguments for God and all the historical and rational arguments for the existence of Jesus Christ and the truth of biblical Christianity. And it plays on all of the stereotypical notions that are found against Christianity and the Bible and Jesus Christ. So my conclusion with this second episode is that this is Antichrist propaganda. So don't fall for it, and if you do decide to watch it without turning off your analytical brain. Don't just see it as useless entertainment, because of course they're trying to program you to believe these things. Hope you have an awesome day. God bless.